the entire history of the United States in 6 minutes. Let's do this! Before we start, there are hundreds of thousands of years worth of history before Europeans showed up that we won't have time to cover. The US is built on land that was first inhabited by indigenous people, whose history goes back thousands of years. We encourage you to learn more about these cultures and histories. In the year 1492, Italian explorer Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic Ocean, hoping to find a faster route to Asia. Instead, he landed in the Bahamas and subsequently died believing he was actually in India. This kicked off a scramble for resources between European powers, who all wanted to establish dominance over the newly discovered continent. In the early 1500s, the Spanish began exploring and conquering much of the south and southwest, while the French established settlements in the Great Lakes region and the English began their push along the east coast. As these European powers scrambled for land, they claimed vast territories in the name of their monarch. However, these were mostly theoretical claims with very few permanent settlements. The English established the first permanent settlement in the U.S. in 1607 with the founding of Jamestown, Virginia. The following year, the Spanish founded the city of St. Augustine, Florida, which is still standing today and is the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the continental U.S. In 1620, a group of English Puritans fleeing religious persecution founded the colony of Plymouth. While the Virginia Company funded the first 2 colonies, this one was funded by a group of investors known as the Mayflower Compact, which helped to set the stage for self-governance in the New World. As the colonies grew, so did tensions with the native populations. In 1637, an alliance of New England colonies fought against the Pequot tribe in the Pequot War, which resulted in hundreds of deaths and the near destruction of the tribe. This was only the beginning of the many conflicts to come between colonists and Native Americans over land rights. Throughout the 17th century, colonies continued to be established along the Atlantic coast from Maine to Georgia. Each had their own unique economic focus and social structure, but they were united under the overarching goal of escaping the rule of the Church of England. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the French and Indian War was being fought between Britain, France, and their respective Native American allies. The war was over control of the Ohio River Valley and the fur trade, and despite being outnumbered, the British were able to win due to crucial aid from the Iroquois Confederacy. This victory came at a cost, though, and Britain found itself deep in debt. To help pay for the war, Britain passed a series of laws known as the Sugar Act, the Currency Act, and the Quartering Act, which levied taxes on goods like sugar and molasses and required colonists to house British troops. These acts were extremely unpopular, and the colonists responded with protests and boycotts. As the tensions between Britain and its colonies grew, so did the desire for independence. In 1770, a group of colonists known as the Sons of Liberty organized protests against the Townshend Acts, which were a series of laws passed by the British Parliament in 1767 that placed new taxes on goods, such as glass, tea lead, and paper. The most famous act was the Tea Act of 1773, which gave the British East India Company a monopoly on the sale of tea in the colonies. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans snuck onto 3 British ships docked in Boston Harbor and dumped 92,000 pounds of tea into the water. This act of defiance was known as the Boston Tea Party, and it escalated tensions between Britain and the colonies. In response to Boston Tea Party, the British government passed the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts. These acts were designed to punish the Massachusetts colony and included closing the port of Boston until the tea was paid for, restricting town hall meetings, and allowing British officials to be tried in England rather than in the colonies. These acts only further galvanized support for the independence movement, and in 1774, delegates from 12 colonies met at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia to coordinate their response when fighting broke out between British troops and colonial militiamen. Lexington and Concord in April of 1775. It marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. After several years of fighting, the Americans, with the help of France, won a decisive victory at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. On September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially ending the war and recognizing the United States as a free and independent nation. The newly formed United States began to take shape as a nation. The first government was the Articles of Confederation, But it was plagued with problems. There was no national currency, no executive branch to enforce laws, and no national army. Shays' Rebellion in 1786, an armed uprising of farmers in western Macedonia, demonstrated the weakness of the central government under the Articles. In 1787, delegates met at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia to draft a new governing document. The result was the United States Constitution, which established a federal republic with a strong central government and a system of checks and balances between the three branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial. The Constitution was ratified in 1788, and George Washington was elected the first president of the United States. Under his leadership, the country grew and developed. The capital was moved to Washington, D.C., and the first political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, began to form. In 1803, the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory from France for $15 million, doubling the size of the country. This acquisition led to the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the vast new territory. During the first half of the 19th century, the U.S. continued to grow. The Erie Canal was completed in 1825, connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean and facilitating trade. Inventions like the cotton gin and the telegraph revolutionized communication and transportation. The U.S. population also grew rapidly, with immigrants flooding into the country seeking new opportunities. However, this rapid growth caused increasing tensions between the North and the South over the issue of slavery. In 1850, the Mexican-American War ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ceded a huge amount of land to the United States. This led to the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, which acquired additional territory from Mexico. As the debate over slavery intensified, a new Republican Party emerged in the 1850s dedicated to stopping the expansion of slavery into new territories. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which allowed for popular sovereignty to determine the status of slavery in new territories, led to the violent conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on an anti-slavery platform. This caused 11 southern states to secede from the Union and form the Confederate States of America. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, beginning the Civil War. The war was long and bloody, but ultimately the Union prevailed. On April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment, and the United States began the long process of Reconstruction. The late 19th century saw significant changes in the U.S. The Industrial Revolution transformed the economy with the rise of big business and new technologies. The United States became a major industrial power, with cities like Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Chicago leading the way. During this time, the U.S. also acquired overseas territories such as Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. The Spanish-American War in 1898 was a notable conflict that resulted in the annexation of these territories. The early 20th century was marked by significant social and political change. The Progressive Era saw reforms aimed at addressing issues such as poverty, corruption, and inequality. The women's suffrage movement culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote. The United States also played a key role in World War I, which ended in 1918. The Roaring Twenties followed with a period of economic growth, new cultural styles, and technological advancements. However, this prosperity was not evenly distributed, and the Great Depression of the 1930s hit the U.S. hard. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs were enacted to provide relief, recovery, and reform during this difficult period. World War II began in 1939, and the U.S. initially remained neutral. But after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. joined the war effort. The U.S. played a crucial role in defeating the Axis powers, and the war led to the deaths of over 100,000 Americans. In 1945, the United Nations was founded with the goal of preventing future wars. The U.S. emerged from World War II as a global superpower. The following decades saw the beginning of the Cold War, with the Soviet Union and the U.S. supporting opposing sides in various conflicts around the world. The U.S. became involved in the Korean War in 1950 and the Vietnam War in the 1960s. These conflicts were highly divisive and controversial. The 1960s and 70s were marked by significant social movements. The Civil Rights Movement fought for equality and an end to racial segregation in the South. The Women's Rights Movement and the Gay Rights Movement also gained momentum during this time. In 1969, the first moon landing occurred with astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin becoming the first humans to walk on the moon. The late 20th century saw the end of the Cold War, with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The U.S. faced both challenges and opportunities in the new millennium. The September 11th attacks led to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Great Recession of 2008 was a significant economic downturn, and the country continues to grapple with issues such as income inequality, healthcare, and gun violence. Despite these challenges, the United States remains a global superpower and a leader in culture, technology, and innovation. Its history, though often marked by conflict and struggle, has been one of significant progress and change. We hope you enjoyed this brief overview of the entire history of the United States. If you want to learn more about any of these events or time periods, we encourage you to visit our channel for additional resources. Thanks for watching.